Good. Well, we're going to start in a couple minutes. Hi. Hey, Gary, come on in. Okay. Be on the lookout.
Cancel that.
All right. Glad you're here, Gary. You're even early. Hi. Yes. No, we're good. We're going to live stream in 135 if you see anybody who wants to come in. And
This is worth standing for.
Yeah, you can sit right up here. Gary, you're hilarious. Sorry? No, this is for LPC, LMFT. We're live streaming in 135. If you want to go to room 135, the whole thing will be live streamed. Anybody else in LMFT, LPC, or nurse? This is a CEU. You guys will get staff development certificates at the end of the day on your way out. If this is for LPCs, LMFT, nurses, they get additional CEU credit. It's a different thing.
155, not 35.
155. We're live streaming in we have one seat right here, but we also are live streaming in 155. We are live streaming in room 155 if you don't want to stand. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started because I think I need every minute I can to get through this presentation. So my name is Michele Sutherland. I'm the Director of Prevention Services for the State Department of Education. I am a licensed school counselor, was a middle school counselor for 5 years at a Title I middle school of about 700. And then I was a student advocacy coordinator at Norman North High School, a large 6A high school in central Oklahoma for a year. That position was created after there were some rapes, and a task force was created. We are live streaming in 155. Task force was created and recommended to create advocate positions at each high school, so I was one of those. It was the first position of its kind at any pre-K-12 district in the nation. It's very common in college to have advocates, but it had never happened in pre-K through 12 that we could find anywhere in the nation. So in that role, I did all trauma, everything I did. We're live streaming in room 155 if you'd like to go to that room, just down the hall. Sexual assault, abuse, death, grief, bullying, extreme bullying, harassment, Title IX issues. Everything I did was trauma, and I did a lot of trauma as well as a middle school counselor. And I became really passionate about this topic because I think it really, really can affect how we work with students in our schools. So created this training after an 8-hour training that I went through and then modified it a little bit to give you this 1-hour training about how to work with students who've been traumatized. Just like you all, we have learning standards at the State Department we follow. Each session has learning standards on its first slide. This one we're going to talk about resources and data, among other things. So what is trauma? Trauma is anything that changes the brain's development. So that could be natural disaster, sexual assault, it could be child abuse, it could be really any of those bad things you normally think of, right? But it could also be really anything, depending on the person and the circumstance. So I'm going to share something kind of embarrassing with you. I have a phobia of vomit, which is not, I mean, nobody likes it, right? But it's really extreme, like panic attack inducing, don't take care of my kids when they're sick, type of run, shut my door. We're live streaming in room 155. Was that on the intercom? Oh, it's your phone. I was like, I don't know what that chime means on the intercom. So I had a traumatic experience. We are live streaming in room 155. We're live streaming in 155, just down the hall. My dad was sick when I was in first grade, and I thought he was dying. And my wires got crossed in my brain, and it was like a 220-volt event in a 9-volt brain. And I began to associate death and vomit together, which I know, like logically, I know now, obviously, being 42 years old, that they're not related. We are live streaming in room 155.
Okay, thank you.
But in my brain, the wires got crossed and I had trauma, and I've had some negative experiences based on that. So if we even start to talk about it in a setting, I really have to like practice my breathing and use all my coping skills to not have a panic attack. And as dumb and as silly and embarrassing as it sounds, it's very real for me. So can you think of any other things that you or your kids have experienced, your students, that may have been trauma to them that maybe not typical, the typical trauma first thing you think of?
I'm afraid of ceiling fans.
Ceiling fans, probably because you had a terrible experience with one. Anything else? That's a really good example. Emus.
Freak me out.
They freak you out. It's okay. You probably had a traumatic experience with an emu or getting bit by a dog, right?
Can't drive with a new driver.
Can't drive with a new driver.
I wrecked it and just about killed my mom and my brother. And so now she can't get in the car with a new driver.
You know, it sounds silly and it seems irrational, but you cannot help it. It's a traumatic event that changed your brain's development, and that is considered to be a trauma. So I want us to keep that in mind as we move forward. I want you guys to meet Ben. He was this precious little adorable 9-pound 3-ounce big baby. He had 10 fingers and 10 toes. He had a pretty normal APGAR score. He hit all his developmental milestones on time. He walked and talked and sat up and crawled, all those things within the normal time frame. But when he was about 18 months or 2 years old, they started noticing something interesting about Ben. He kind of would hyper-focus on things where he would play with like a toy, like he's playing with this little Superman toy right there, and the world could be coming apart around him, but he was so hyper-focused on it, nobody could get his attention at all. Ben started pre-K. Wasn't he cute? Cute little dude. But he had a tough guy complex. So he started knocking over blocks, throwing toys, taking other toys away from children, pushing kids down, biting, hitting, all those things that you don't want to see. And the other thing the teacher noticed was Ben would fall asleep at really awkward times. Like they'd be sitting in the circle time on the carpet, and she'd look over and Ben would just be collapsed asleep on the kid next to him. All things that were really concerning to his teacher. Ben also had an anger problem. He would lose his temper, and as he got older, he started doing things like destroying classrooms when he got upset, throwing staplers, picking up chairs, flipping over desks and tables, to the point where they were having to clear classrooms because Ben was having a meltdown. He also would cry at really weird times, sometimes that they would just be kind of inappropriate or a strong emotion for something that's really not appropriate. And Ben ended up being the cool kid that drug all the other good kids into naughty behavior. You know the one, right? The cool kid that drug everybody else down. Ben would show up to school sometimes and he would have marks on his face, or bruises, or bumps, or scratches. And when you would ask Ben, how did you get that scratch? He would give you an explanation, something like, oh, I fell out of a tree, or I fell down the stairs, or my cat scratched me, or my dog bit me. Some sort of explanation that just didn't quite make sense for you. Ben started growing, and as he did, the troubles continued to follow him. Who has heard of the ACE study? ACE. Okay, ACE is Adverse Childhood Experience. This is something you can Google and look it up. Basically, the ACE study is a 10-question survey to ask anyone about their experiences before they were an adult, before they were 18 years old. And based on your score, the higher your score, the higher correlation there is between bad things in life, like disease, dropout, premarital sex, bad stuff, right? Including early death. So we know that this is a research-based survey, and we're going to go through it real quick. So while you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, did a parent or other adult in the household, often or very often, swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? If yes, enter 1. Do you think that's true for Ben? I think it probably is. Ben was the oldest of 5, and they were back to back to back. And Ben's mama had bipolar disorder, or has bipolar disorder. But she was untreated because they lived in poverty, and she was convinced that she couldn't afford the health care. So instead of treating it with like normal go see a psychiatrist medication, she was treating it with street drugs, including meth, and she was addicted to meth. It was really hard at her house. There was not really a stable man around. There were a lot of men around, but not one stable man, no dad figure. And Ben was frequently in charge of taking care of his younger siblings. And if any of his younger siblings would get out of line, Ben would be the one to pay the price for that naughty behavior. So did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? As you may guess, the answer for Ben is yes. He was physically abused pretty frequently, and all those times you thought his story didn't make sense, your instinct was correct. Did an adult person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? If yes, enter 1. Now, we don't know for sure about Ben, but we do know there was a revolving door of men in and out of the house all the time. So this is a possibility, but we're not entirely sure. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for you, each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? This was definitely a 1 for Ben. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? This is definitely a 1 for Ben. Many times, the only time Ben would eat would be at school because there was no food at home. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Well, Ben's parents were never married to begin with. And when Ben was about 2 months old, his dad robbed a liquor store and got arrested and is in prison now. Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes often or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit at least a few times or threatened with a gun or a knife? Unfortunately, the answer for Ben was yes. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? We know that Mom's a meth addict, so that's a yes for Ben also. Was a household member depressed, mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? Not only was Mom mentally ill, but Ben could recall at least 3 times that his mother attempted suicide that he knew about. Did a household member go to prison? We know Ben's dad is in prison. So adding up your ACE scores, we know Ben is a 9. I read a really interesting article this weekend that said you're considered at risk if you have 3 or more on your ACE score. So a 9 is an extremely high score. And unfortunately, the article also stated that in Oklahoma, 45.5% of Oklahoma children have at least a 3 or higher ACE score. That's almost half of the kids that we have I'm getting goosebumps talking about it, because it's almost half of the children that we have in our classrooms have a 3 or higher ACE score. And y'all, these are not mild questions. These are all really serious issues. So when we talk about trauma, fear, and brain capacity, I'm not a scientist, but this is a brain. This is our brain fully at work. We're using our whole brain. But when we are in survival mode, we are only using our brainstem. So when we are in the flight, fight, or freeze mode, we are only using our brainstem. It's our entire capacity is involving out of our stem of our brain. And it's not until someone feels safe that they can even begin to learn. So has Ben learning anything at school? It doesn't matter how gifted he is or how smart he is or how much he studies. If he's living in fear all the time, which he is, he's only able to use his brainstem because that's the way the brain works to protect itself. And are any of these things Ben's fault? None of it is Ben's fault. None of what's happened to him is his fault. It's not his fault that he's the oldest of 5. It's not his fault that his dad is in prison. It's not his fault that his mom is mentally ill or using meth. None of it, not a single thing on that list that we talked about was Ben's fault. He is in fear all the time. When we talk about a circle of security, it's really important to know that it's a complete circle. And so what we see is that children have needs, which we know. We have a response, and it should be with oversight, delight, help, and enjoyment, which I'll tell you about in a second. Then a child welcomes you into their world, and they feel safe and secure. So this is the most important part that we're going to talk about today, our response. Oversight, delight, help, and enjoyment. I told a story in my last session that I'll tell again because it's so relevant. We had a student in our school who had a high ACE score, we'll just say. And every darn day, the child wore a hat to school when there was a no hat policy, every day. And every day, people were all over his case, taking his hat. I mean, I don't know how many hats this kid had because we took them all. One day, our principal snuck around and followed him and wrote down 10 negative interactions that he had with adults before the first bell ever rang. What are you doing wearing that hat? Take that hat off. What is wrong with you? You know better than to do that. All these things that adults are saying because they're mad at him for wearing a hat to school every darn day of his life, right? So what would have happened instead if I would have responded to this child with oversight, delight, help, and enjoyment? So what if it looked like this? Hey, I am so happy to see you today. Thank you for choosing to come to school. I know you had a choice, and I'm really glad you chose to come. Yeah, I see that you're wearing a hat, and I wanted to offer to hold on to that hat for you until the end of the day so nobody gave you a hard time about it. Would it be okay? I'll keep it really safe, and you can have it back at the end of the day. Sure. So oversight, I still made him follow the rule, right? Delight, I was delighted to see him. I was so happy that I told him how happy I was, acknowledged that he had a choice on whether or not to be there. Help, I offered to help him by holding onto his hat. And enjoyment, I had a smile on my face, I made eye contact with him, and acted like I was enjoying him. Now that is not easy to do that, especially to a kid who's naughty. The same kid, my first year as a counselor, I have one button, like one big button that kids push, and it's when they're disrespectful of me in front of their peers. And I didn't know that that was my button yet because I was still pretty new. But this kid, it was in the lunchroom, and this kid was being really disrespectful of me in front of his peers, and I walked right up to him and got in his face and said, "Don't you talk to me that way." And all of a sudden, I felt this pull of my shirt pulling me backward, and it was my principal, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And later he said, "Michelle, I don't know if you saw this, but he had his fist balled up. He was about to hit you." You cannot bow up to a kid. You can't do it, especially to one who has got a lot of issues. You can't do that. So what I learned to do instead was wait until I wasn't mad anymore, because it wasn't the last time he was disrespectful. But then I would call him into my office and say, "Hey, my feelings are really hurt. You know, I'm always nice to you. I'm kind. I offer you help and assistance. And it really hurt my feelings that you acted that way in front of your friends." And it changed everything about our relationship. His response immediately, instead of was, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't think about it upsetting you." He was just showing off. He didn't think about me having feelings. And not only did I teach him that I had feelings, but I taught him how to resolve a conflict the correct way, right? And how to deal with it. So we have to respond. Our response matters. It matters every time. And we're not going to always get it right, but it still matters, our response, every single time. And then a child welcomes you in, and that's when they can start to feel safe and secure. And that means they can start to learn. Uh-oh. Did I turn it off? Oh, that's different. I don't know what happened. This is not good. Okay, we're back. So in our circle of security, we have the attachment cycle. Sorry about that little glitch. So we have needs expressed and needs met, Over here we have distrust. We have excitatory neurotransmitters, sympathetic nervous system, and distrust. Over here, though, we have comfort. And we have inhibitory neurotransmitters and parasympathetic nervous system and comfort. So what does all that mean? Now, I'm not a scientist, but I looked up the definitions for you. A sympathetic nervous system's primary response is to stimulate the body's flight or fight response. However, the parasympathetic nervous system's primary process is to rest and digest. Which would you rather have in your classroom, flight or fight or rest and digest? Rest and digest. We have the inhibitory neurotransmitters that are chemical messengers that transmit messages to inhibit you. On the opposite side, we have the excitatory neurotransmitters that are chemical messengers to excite you. Now, we want kids to be excited about learning, but really in a classroom, would you rather they be inhibited or excited? Probably inhibited, right? So we want them to be over here on the side of comfort, correct? A lack of felt safety manifests in an emotional deregulation, which we know to be true. We program our neurosystems of children by helping them regulate. So as we teach them how to regulate, we're helping them program the comfort, the parasympathetic nervous system, and inhibitory neurotransmitters. The parasympathetic nervous system has to get exercised. Just like anything, you're not going to be good at it the first time you do it. Can you imagine being a professional soccer player if you've never played before? So you have to practice and get better at it. And it all starts with a relationship. And that's what it's all about. And I'm a huge, huge fan of this concept of relationship. And I believe that everything in education starts with a relationship. Did you know that when a baby is born, he or she has the same neurochemical profile as their mama? What kind of neurochemical profile did Ben have? What was it? He was on drugs. Mom was bipolar, so he's got that neurochemical profile. Abuse, suicidal. Were any of those things Ben's fault? No. Not a one. So what affects neurochemistry? Nutrition, mental illness, and trauma. Which is the one we can affect as educators? There's only one. Nutrition. So how many of you have a snack drawer in your office or your classroom? Praise you. If you do not, and you're looking at me like, Michelle, you're crazy because I make $2 an hour, and I have no money because I'm a teacher in Oklahoma, you're right. So I want to encourage you to partner with a local nonprofit, with a local church, with your PTA, and get them to provide you some healthy snacks, some granola bars, some crackers and cheese, or crackers and peanut butter, some fruit snacks. Beef jerky is a good one. Like things that are have protein in them and that are good for the brain. Get a snack drawer, because I'm telling you, there are some kids who just want you to come in and give them food, but you're going to know the difference. And if your child is hungry, they need to eat. We need to give them nutrition. This is why it's so important that we have free and reduced lunches at school. And if you know of a child who maybe doesn't qualify for free and reduced lunch financially, but you know they need the free and reduced lunch, your school can usually make a recommendation, and they usually can process that even if they don't meet the financial requirements. Or maybe a financial situation has changed and the parents are not going to get in to fill out the paperwork. Your school can put them in that system. So remember that. There are 3 pillars of trauma-informed care. There's felt safety, connection, and self-regulation. As educators, which one of these 3 do we have the best chance of affecting? Of those 3? Connection. We have the best chance of affecting connection. Now, we can help with the other 2, but I think it all kind of leans on connection. So I have a video I want to show you. It's a little bit of a sad video to watch, but I think it's really relevant to this training. It's called the Still Face Experiment, and I will let you guys listen.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This this is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. And the still face experiment that the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal,
Up as high as it'll go.
they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
So basically what we see in this, would you grab the lights for me? Thank you. So what we see in this, and I'm sorry for my live streaming folks if you couldn't hear that, the volume was all the way up. I don't know why it was so soft. What we see is when the mom checks out and has the still face, the baby does everything she can to get mom's attention, does all the tricks, tries clapping, tries pointing, finally is just like, I don't know what to do. How does this remind you of today and the kids you work with? What does it make you think of?
Parents are checked out.
Parents are.
TV, cell phones.
I'm totally guilty of this, by the way. I'm going to throw myself under the bus. There are many times when my kids will say, "Mom, Mom, Mom," and I'm like, "What? I just asked you, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Oh, sorry. I'll put my phone down." But what happens if a kid has to do this all the time? What if parents work 2 jobs? Maybe they're great parents, but they're working 2 jobs and the only time they're home is to sleep. Or what happens if mom and dad are having a hard time and they're using all of their relational energy on each other? Or what happens if there's something else, a health crisis? There's all kinds of things that can pull the attention of a parent away from a child, and you get this reaction. So what do you think? Now, babies can't rationalize any of this, and they process through all of those behaviors really fast. But what happens when it's a 4 or 5-year-old or a 12 or 13-year-old? What are you getting in your classrooms? Violence, depression, aggression, disrespect, withdrawal, not turning in their work, not even attempting to do their work. Because really, how can you do your work when you can't feel safe? Right? We know that if they're just using their brainstem and they're not feeling safe, they're not even going to attempt their homework. And we have to figure out a way to work with them to connect to that connection pillar to make it okay for them. So when we talk about trauma and trust, they don't really go together, so you have to build a bridge for them to get together. We have connection principles, empowering principles, and correction principles, the 3 areas. Did you know 90% of learning is nonverbal? 90%. So what I want you to do is look around this room and see what you can learn from this room just by looking around. The nonverbal learning way. I love classrooms because there's always nonverbal learning going on around here. What are some things that you're learning just by being in this classroom? Anybody?
I'm not the only one dealing with kids with trauma.
Yeah, that's true. We all deal with trauma. What else can you learn? They're sharing information on their walls. So we've got, I don't know what kind of classroom this is, because we've got human skeleton over here. Braille, and then we have a world map. So we have all kinds of different learning happening in this classroom, don't we? There's all kinds, and this one is,
some kind of organizational skills going on with the
there's organizational skills, right? So, and this classroom, it's the summertime, so it's not even really decorated, but nonverbal learning is super, super important. So instead of throwing in words, engage directly by getting on their level, hold hands or touch, and voice modulation. So I talk about my own kids because it's not illegal. There's no FERPA violation when I do that. So I did this, I don't know if you know this, but when little boys hit about 12 or 13, they revert their behavior, and it's because their frontal lobe is starting to develop. So when your frontal lobe starts to develop, your brain becomes a baby, and you start doing things like throwing 2-year-old temper tantrums, which you'll be shocked to see this in your middle schools, right? So my son, my younger son, who is about to turn 13, went through this about a year ago, where his frontal lobe was starting to develop, and he was like throwing himself on the floor, and I thought I had failed as a parent. But I had been through this training, and so I tried it. So this crazy thing happened. So he's on the floor. I don't even remember what he was throwing a fit about, but he was on the floor, and I got down on one knee, and very gently, I did not abuse my child, but I put my thumb under his chin and my finger right here just to direct his gaze into my face, and I lowered my voice. Now, I'm typically a yeller. You can tell that I project, I talk loudly, but I lowered my voice. And the first thing that happened was he's like, "What is up with this counselor voodoo?" He thought I was crazy, was the first thing he did. But really, y'all, it worked. Like, the quieter I got, the more calm he got. Another example of this is both my kids had this amazing pre-K teacher. Her name is Elizabeth Dalma. Amazing. The first time I met her, I walked into her classroom to introduce her to my son, and she said, "Hi, I'm so happy to have Ryan in my classroom." And she barely spoke above a whisper. And I thought, she's in trouble, y'all. It's not going to go well. She has 4-year-olds. Have you met a 4-year-old? Have you met my 4-year-old? But what I learned by getting to know her and observing in her classroom is the quieter she got, the quieter her kids got. It was amazing. It was like a magic trick. I've tried it. It works. So she would get quieter and calmer, and her kids would get quieter and calmer. It is amazing how this works. So instead of those throwing words of, "What's wrong with you? What are you doing?" which is what I want to say when a kid throws a fit on the floor and they're 12 years old, instead you say, "What's going on, bud? How can I help you?" Lower your voice, getting calm touch, getting on their level. It works. It does. It's the craziest thing. So even if it's like they're put their head down on their desk instead of standing over them and talking to them, get down on their level. "Hey, how's it going today? What are you working on? Or what's keeping you from working today?" Just quiet, calm their level. Pat on the shoulder. "Doing okay today?" All those things can really work to help connect you. We're eliminating their fears. We're paying attention to their communication. If a kid walks in your room, is that a good time to engage in a fun dialogue? Probably not. We probably need to help them regulate their emotions, right? Get them regulated. Maybe they're hot. Let them splash some cold water on their face. Let them have a water bottle on their desk. Whatever they need to do to help them regulate, and then start to have that conversation. Respond flexibly. Meet them in the middle. It's somebody said in my last class. I talked to the story about the hat, the kid with the hat. And they said, we had a kid who their parents punished them by shaving their head. Let them wear the hat, y'all. Even if it's against the rules, let them wear a hat. Be flexible about that. Be empathetic, which we'll talk about in a second. Strive for emotional balance. I had a great example of this. In one of these first lessons that I did, I had a teacher tell me, sometimes if a class is just wild and out of control, and I need a break, and I can't take a break because I've got another class coming in, what I'll say to that class is, "Hey guys, I'm having a hard day. I need 5 minutes of really quiet. Can you please help me out?" When we ask kids to help us, they're like, "Yeah, I can help you. Watch me. Look how good and mature I am that I can help you." So asking for help or quiet or giving them something quiet to do, and after that 5 minutes, he can self-regulate, and then everything can start again. I think that's totally good to do that and to recognize your own emotions. Using your intuition and insight. You guys are so smart. You've got so much experience. I bet there's hundreds of years of education experience in this room of working with children. Use your experience and your intuition. When you know that something's not right, trust your gut. Or if your gut says to do something or ask something, trust your gut. Too often we don't trust our gut. I mean, I think the best advice as a mom I ever got was trust your gut as a mom. And it's the same thing in education. We have to trust our gut with kids and listen to what that intuition is telling us and what our experience tells us and move with that going forward. And then helping them regulate their body and their emotions. How many of you have seen this video before, this Brene Brown video? Not enough of you to not show it. Okay, so empathy is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and imagining how they would feel. And I could spend a whole session describing it for you, or I could show you this less than 3-minute video. So this is a great 3-minute video by Brene Brown. Would you mind turning the lights off?
Like anything on your computer.
We're going to skip this ad in just 2 seconds.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
What makes something better is connection. Would you grab the lights for me, please? It's Brene Brown is the name of the person talking. It's B-R-E-N-E, Brown. She's a psychologist and researcher and a writer. She writes amazing books I encourage you to read. If you like nonfiction, she's the best. And it's just, if you go to YouTube and look Brene Brown, empathy, or just if you write empathy, it'll pop up. It's the most searched empathy video on the internet. So it's really, really good, and it's short, and it's such a great, accurate description. So when we're talking about connection, you can be authoritative, but not yelling or shouting. You can have them follow the rules and tell them what to do without yelling or shouting, which is not always easy for loud people like me. Making eye contact, match their behavior and playful interaction. I autistic student that I worked with, he was 6'5", 300 pounds. He was gigantic, and he was in 7th grade. And he would have meltdowns, and they would be kind of scary because he's a big guy. So he also loved computers. And so what we started doing was rebooting whenever he would have a meltdown. And I would do this with him. We would lay on the floor. We'd turn ourselves off. We'd lay on the floor, and then we'd reboot. We'd turn on our imaginary button and power up and kind of restart slowly. And by golly, it worked for that kid every time. Every time. Now, I couldn't be that lucky probably ever again in my life for it to work every time. But doing that with him, matching his behavior, very appropriate and good. Healthy touch, we've got fist bumps, hey, what's going on, high five, we got a pat on the shoulder. One thing I love to do when I'm talking to someone, and if you ever talk to me in person, you'll know this, is, would you mind standing up for a second? So when I'm talking to someone, frequently I'll just reach out and touch their elbow. Maybe it's a light touch, or maybe it's a pat. An elbow is probably the least scary place to touch somebody on their body. Thank you. You can sit down. A gentle touch on the elbow is very unassuming, and it's okay. It's appropriate. It's their arm, and it is a very good connection principle. Empowering principles. Did you know 90% of the time when a breakdown happens, it happens during a transition? How many transitions do we have every day in our world? Who has an elementary classroom? Walk me through what a typical day in an elementary classroom looks like, just generally speaking.
I am a SPED.
Okay, perfect.
3 grades, 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
3rd, 4th, and 5th SPED.
And we have transitions
all the time.
I have 3 classes going on at once. So I'm working with 3 or 4 kids per grade, and one's transitioning from computers over to reading.
Computers to reading.
Math. We do. Then I have kids coming and pulled out for OT, PT,
pulling
speech.
out.
I mean, it's just.
It's all the time. It's all day, every day.
Like literally, with the amount of kids I have in my room, probably 100 an hour.
100 an hour. 100 transitions an hour. At least.
Yeah.
All the time. And we have to transition that much for the little ones because of their attention span. It's what research tells us to do. It's what evidence tells us to do, right? We've got to transition a lot. Even when they get older, if you take one math class, the first transition's walking the door, then you're sitting down, then you're doing bell work, then there's general instruction, and then there's small group work, and then there's individual work, then there's one-on-one work with the teacher, and then it's time to transition to the next class. We transition all the time. So helping kids who you know struggle with transition by giving them something like a visual marker, like what if you wrote on a sticky note what you were going to do in a day, just stuck it on their desk when they walked in, or maybe you have it written on the board, or maybe it's the same all the time for a kid, or maybe there is a cue. Okay, it's time for our next one. Or I know what I would do with my own personal children all the time is 5 more minutes. I mean, that could go by in 30 seconds, but at least I'm giving them a warning, like a cue. Empowering principles, sensory diets. Anybody use a weighted blanket? Oh, they're so good. If you have anxiety, you can put a big heavy blanket on you. Oh, it's so comforting. Other things that work would be like a heavy textbook in the lap of a kid who kind of feels unsafe. Weighted backpacks, and it's a great idea. Transitions, we talked about. Touch points. You guys are the touch point for kids a lot of the time. So having check-in and check-out with them maybe once or twice a day or 3 times a day might be really helpful for them. Artifacts. My younger son got his primary teacher, a counselor who is awesome, a sock monkey for Christmas one year. He picked it out. And that was about 5 years ago. And she wrote me a note this year that said, hey, just wanted you to know, the sock monkey you gave me has a very important job. I have a child who will not go to class. And the only way this child will go to class is if the sock monkey goes with her. So she comes and checks out the sock monkey at the beginning of the day, takes her with her to class, and brings it back at the end of the day. So those artifacts sometimes can be really, really helpful to kids. Rituals, doing the same thing the same way every time. Managing hydration and blood sugar, really important. Regular physical activity. Don't take away kids' recess if you can help it, please. Especially if they have ADHD or a busy kid. Maybe they need an extra break in there where maybe it's spelling time and you have somebody who could help you, a volunteer, and they could walk around the track with the kid while they did their spelling test or spelling words. Meeting their nutritional needs, and then again, healthy touch, really important. Life value terms include gentle and kind. I'd like for you to be gentle and kind, please. We are gentle and kind in my classroom. Using your words and with respect. That's a good one. Instead of just being, hey, don't be so disrespectful. What if instead you said, hey, could you try that again this time with respect, please? I'm a believer that we have to show kids respect before they give us respect. A lot of people feel like it's the opposite, but I don't. I disagree with that. We have to show a kid respect before they will respect us back. We do have to earn it. Proactive strategies, offering choices. I love love and logic. We're going to have a seating chart change, and you can sit here or here. Which do you choose? Both of those are okay with me. Simple things. Compromises. Okay, you need a break. You want to miss this class. How about I set my timer for 10 minutes instead, and you have a break. You can lay your head down. Behavioral redos. I talked in the first session I did about 6th graders loving to run through the lunch line, and instead of just issuing a consequence, have them walk back to their chair, sit down, and try it again by walking through the line like they're supposed to. Just one example of a behavior redo. When you correct someone, the ideal response is immediate if you can, especially the younger they are, the more immediate it needs to be. Direct, not in front of a whole classroom, but direct with a kiddo. Efficient, action-based, and leveled to the behavior, not the child. Because if a child is anything like my friend Ben at all, are any of the reasons why Ben acts the way he does his fault? No, they're not. He's a child. So we have to correct the behavior, not the child. Does that make sense? So I have a confession to make. I have to tell you the truth about Ben. His name is not really Ben. His name is Will Sutherland. He's my son. He just happens to be really funny and photogenic, and so I took all these pictures and was able to compile a fake story. I do not do math. It's a fake story based on all the interactions I've had with kids through my career, and I created a character for Ben. But he is a great kid. He's hilarious. He did throw a temper tantrum on the floor. That is true, but the rest of that was a story that I used as an example. Do you all have any questions or comments? Yes?
The way I handle a kid that's acting up, if they're doing something, especially cussing, whatever, I always say, we don't act that way. I include me in the statement. We don't act like that here. And don't raise your voice, but we don't do that.
So you include yourself.
I say, now think about it for a second, then I let them think about it, and I say, now why don't we act like that?
Great. So they kind of explain why they're not doing that. That's good. Yes?
When I have a particular student who's with that
right.
And I would just ask him, can you please step outside this? And
yeah.
So with kindness and with love, send him outside.
So using kindness and love and giving them a minute.
Then I walk out to him, and I don't stand in front of him and engage him.
Right.
I stand beside him.
Yes. Standing beside.
And I'm like, what's going on? Why would you disrespect him? I don't want to be that way in my classroom.
Right.
Stand beside him so
right.
that I'm not threatening him.
Right.
He still has space. He's not contained. He's not
right.
in fear. He's just got somebody that loves him.
Very good. Another technique that I learned through some training I went to is instead of standing, like if somebody's standing in front of me, stand like this to the side for a couple of reasons. One, it's far less intimidating, but also if you have a kid who kind of starts to lose it, it's easier to get away than running backwards. And I'm serious about that because that has happened to me before for sure. So I love you, but I don't love the way you're acting. I like it.
We have, I'm an administrator here in Durant and at the intermediate school, and we actually, it's just that connection. We don't ask our teachers to deal with dress code issues at all. We don't want them correcting the kids. We want everything to be positive.
That's great.
And they email the counselors and whichever counselor, or whoever's assigned to that kid, and then they call the child.
That's great.
And deal with needs and that kind of situation.
So what she said was that teachers don't deal with dress code issues, that they give that to counselors because they want the kid to have the connection with the teacher, and the counselor can do it in a different way where it's not such an issue, like a punitive issue, that it's more like a conversation. Which I could do a whole session about dress code, because I think a lot of times kids don't have a lot of choices themselves. So that's really good for a counselor to have that conversation.
Having a closet.
A closet?
For kids is huge. I've had to give kids clothes.
Like a clothing closet?
I'll go to a garage sale, 10 cents, 25 cents.
Yeah.
Because of course, we're all broke. And it's the kids they'll walk through the hallway and they're like, oh God, look at that kid. He's weird.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, what's up? Come on, come in my room.
Yeah.
And they're like, thank you. And they just
Right.
know. And they'll
Right.
go over to my little closet and they'll get clothes out.
Yeah. So having like a clothing closet as a resource, a great idea. Okay, you guys were awesome. Thank you so much. I will come out to your schools and do this presentation. You can email me and request it. Or any other presentation for that matter.